The moment my sister smiled at my mother's funeral, I realized she still believed she had won, but she had no idea our mother had already set the truth in motion long before either of us entered that chapel. The rain had finally stopped by the time I pulled into the cemetery outside Madison, leaving the pavement dark and shining beneath a pale gray sky. Rows of black umbrellas drifted toward the chapel like slow-moving shadows, and the scent of wet cedar filled the cool afternoon air. 8 years had passed since I had stood beside most of the people gathering there, yet every familiar face instantly reminded me how quickly a family could decide which story was easier to believe. I switched off the engine and rested both hands on the steering wheel for a moment longer than I intended. I had imagined this drive hundreds of times over the years, but nothing prepared me for knowing I was about to say goodbye to the woman who had quietly loved me even when everyone else assumed I deserved to be forgotten. My phone buzzed softly in the cup holder. Levi's name appeared on the screen. "I am 5 minutes behind you," he said calmly after I answered. "Harold needed me to collect your mother's sealed packet from his downtown office before the service, and the traffic back out of Madison was heavier than expected." His steady voice settled the storm inside my chest the way it always did. "It is okay," I replied. "I can handle walking in alone." There was a brief silence before he answered. "You have handled much harder things than this, Nora. Just remember one thing. You are not walking back into your past. You are walking toward your future." I smiled despite the ache pressing against my ribs. That was Levi. He never spoke loudly, never tried to rescue me from my feelings. He simply reminded me that they would not last forever. "I will see you inside," I whispered before ending the call. As I stepped from the car, a cool breeze tugged gently at the edge of my charcoal coat. I had chosen simple clothes on purpose. No designer labels. No expensive jewelry. Just a small silver necklace my mother had given me after I graduated from architecture school. It rested against my collarbone like a quiet promise that some things could survive time. People standing near the chapel entrance noticed me almost immediately. Conversations paused. Eyes widened. Some offered polite nods while others quickly looked away, unsure whether they should greet me or pretend they had not seen me at all. I understood their hesitation. For years they had only heard one version of what happened. According to my older sister Camila, I had abandoned the family after becoming selfish and obsessed with my career. According to Camila, our mother had spent years wondering why her younger daughter cared more about old buildings than about family dinners. According to Camila, I had disappeared because I no longer wanted anything to do with the people who raised me. The truth had always been quieter than the lies, and quiet stories rarely traveled as fast. I reached the chapel doors and paused just long enough to steady my breathing. Through the glass I saw framed photographs of my mother placed beside white lilies. There was one picture of her laughing in our backyard while holding 2 little girls by their hands. Camila and I could not have been older than 8 and 11. Looking at that photograph hurt more than I expected because I could still remember the afternoon it had been taken. Before jealousy. Before betrayal. Before every holiday became another excuse to avoid each other. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. Soft piano music floated through the room. Guests dressed in dark clothing filled nearly every pew. At the front stood Camila. She wore an elegant black dress that probably cost more than my first month's rent when I moved to Savannah. Her makeup was flawless despite the occasion, and she accepted hugs with practiced grace, gently pressing tissues to perfectly dry eyes whenever someone offered condolences. Standing beside her was Gabriel. 8 years earlier he had been the man I planned to marry. Now he smiled politely at guests while wearing an expensive watch that caught the light every time he adjusted his suit jacket. For one brief second our eyes met across the room. Recognition flashed across his face, followed almost immediately by discomfort. Camila noticed him looking past her shoulder. She turned slowly until her eyes found mine. Her expression froze for only an instant before transforming into the same confident smile I remembered so well. She crossed the room without hesitation, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. Every conversation nearby seemed to fade as people sensed something uncomfortable approaching. Camila stopped a few feet away and looked me up and down with the same familiar mixture of amusement and superiority. "Well," she said brightly enough for several nearby relatives to hear, "I honestly was not sure you would come." I met her gaze without answering. She tilted her head slightly. "Still dressing like you were trying to save every dollar?" Her smile widened. "Some things never change." A few uncomfortable chuckles escaped from relatives standing nearby before disappearing into awkward silence. I simply looked at her. 8 years ago I would have tried to defend myself. I would have explained my choices. I would have hoped she might finally understand. That woman no longer existed. Camila studied my face as though searching for anger she could enjoy. Instead she found only calm, and somehow that seemed to disappoint her. "Mom would have wanted everyone together today," she continued smoothly. "It is just unfortunate that some people waited until the funeral to remember they still had a family." Before I could answer, the chapel doors opened once more behind us. Several heads turned at the exact same moment. Someone had just arrived, carrying a plain leather portfolio instead of flowers, and although almost nobody recognized him yet, the quiet confidence in his step made even Camila stop smiling for the first time that afternoon. I watched Levi close the chapel door behind him, but before our eyes could meet, Camila recovered her smile as though nothing had interrupted her performance. She folded her hands gracefully in front of her and turned back toward our relatives. "Please excuse us," she said sweetly. "Today is about honoring our mother." Her voice carried just enough warmth to sound sincere, yet I knew every word had been carefully measured. She wanted everyone watching. She always wanted an audience. Levi did not interrupt her. He simply offered a respectful nod to the minister near the front of the chapel before taking a seat several rows behind everyone else. The plain leather portfolio remained tucked beneath his arm. Nobody asked who he was. Most people assumed he was another attorney handling paperwork after the funeral. Camila glanced toward him only briefly before dismissing him entirely. That tiny moment told me everything. She still believed appearances explained everything worth knowing. I quietly stepped into an empty pew near the back while the service began. As the minister spoke about my mother's generosity and unwavering kindness, memories surfaced that I had spent years trying to bury. 8 years earlier, our family looked completely different from the outside. Camila seemed to have the perfect life. She was outgoing, charismatic, and effortlessly charming. Wherever she went, people laughed a little louder and listened a little longer. I was the quieter sister, happiest with blueprints spread across a drafting table or wandering through restored historic buildings with a notebook in my hand. My mother used to tell people that Camila could brighten any room while I could quietly rebuild one. At the time, I thought both gifts were equally valuable. I never imagined one would eventually be used to destroy the other. Back then I had been engaged to Gabriel Cook. He was an ambitious real estate agent with an easy smile and endless confidence. We had spent nearly 2 years planning a future together. We toured neighborhoods on weekends, argued playfully about kitchen layouts, and dreamed about buying an old craftsman house that I could restore while he handled the investment. It felt like a simple life, but it was the one I wanted. Camila often joked that Gabriel and I balanced each other because he talked enough for both of us. I laughed every time she said it. Looking back now, I realized she had been studying us much more carefully than I ever understood. The first small warning arrived almost a year before everything collapsed. Gabriel started mentioning Camila's opinions during conversations that had nothing to do with her. Camila thinks this neighborhood will become the next hot market. Camila says you work too much. Camila thinks you should stop worrying about every little detail. At first I assumed they had simply become friends. My own sister. My fiancé. Why would I question that? Then came the canceled dinners. Gabriel always had another client meeting. Camila always had another networking event. Neither explanation seemed unusual until I noticed how often those schedules overlapped. One Saturday afternoon I called Camila to ask whether she wanted to help Mom plant flowers in the backyard. She answered quickly but sounded flustered. "I am busy right now," she said. "Maybe next weekend." As she spoke, I heard a familiar laugh somewhere behind her. It sounded remarkably like Gabriel. Before I could ask, she hurried off the phone. I remember standing in my apartment staring at the silent screen, telling myself not to be ridiculous. Families trusted each other. Sisters trusted each other. I refused to become someone who imagined betrayal without proof. That decision bought Camila several more months. The memory faded as the minister paused to invite everyone into a moment of silence. Around me, heads lowered. Camila dabbed carefully beneath one eye with another tissue. Gabriel gently placed his hand across hers. They looked like the picture of devotion. Anyone seeing them for the first time would probably believe they had spent years supporting my mother through every hardship. They had become experts at looking compassionate whenever someone happened to be watching. I kept my attention on the framed photograph near the casket instead. My mother's smile in that picture had always carried a quiet confidence, as though she understood things she never needed to explain. Sometimes I wondered whether she had noticed far more than she ever admitted. The thought lingered in my mind because during our final phone conversation, only 3 weeks before she passed away, she had said something that still echoed inside me. "Nora," she whispered after a long pause, "truth has strange timing. Sometimes it waits until people have stopped expecting it." At the time I assumed she was talking about her illness. Now, sitting only a few feet from Camila, I was no longer certain. The service continued, but my thoughts drifted back to the afternoon everything finally shattered. I had left work early because one of my project meetings had been cancelled unexpectedly. Gabriel had told me he would spend the afternoon showing a property to clients across town. I decided to surprise him with dinner ingredients for his favorite homemade pasta recipe. As I climbed the stairs to his apartment carrying grocery bags, I noticed something that immediately felt wrong. Parked outside his building sat Camila's white SUV. I actually smiled to myself. Maybe she had stopped by to help him plan my birthday surprise. That innocent explanation lasted only until I reached the apartment door. Before I even touched the handle, I heard both of them laughing together inside. I stood frozen outside Gabriel's apartment with 2 bags of groceries hanging from my hands, unable to convince myself that what I was hearing could possibly mean what my heart already knew. Camila laughed first. Gabriel answered with the same relaxed tone he always used around me, except this time there was something lighter in his voice, something completely free of responsibility. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe they were planning a surprise. Maybe I was letting my imagination get ahead of me. I reached for the doorknob with trembling fingers because Gabriel had given me a key months earlier. The apartment door opened quietly. Neither of them heard me step inside. They were standing near the kitchen island with photographs spread across the counter. Wedding venue brochures lay beside them. At first I smiled with relief because I thought they had been discussing our wedding plans. Then I noticed Camila holding a second engagement ring beneath the kitchen light. She slowly turned the diamond between her fingers while Gabriel smiled back at her, and the wedding venue brochures spread across the counter made it painfully clear that they were no longer discussing my future. My mind refused to process the image. Camila turned before Gabriel noticed me. Her expression shifted for barely a second before settling into complete confidence. She did not remove the ring. She did not apologize. She simply folded her arms and leaned comfortably against the counter. Gabriel slowly turned around. Every trace of color disappeared from his face. "Nora," he began, taking one uncertain step forward. I placed the grocery bags on the floor without saying a word. One carton of eggs rolled gently across the hardwood before stopping against a chair leg. Nobody moved. Nobody even looked at it. Finally I asked the only question my mind could form. "How long?" Gabriel lowered his eyes. Camila answered instead. "About 8 months." Her honesty somehow hurt even more than another lie would have. You have been seeing each other for 8 months? I repeated quietly. Gabriel rubbed the back of his neck without looking at me. It was never supposed to happen like this. Camila actually laughed. People always say that when they get caught. I looked from one face to the other, searching desperately for someone who still remembered we were family. Instead, I found two people who had already rewritten the story in their own minds. Gabriel finally spoke again. Nora, you deserve someone who understands you better. I stared at him in disbelief. After 2 years together, that is what you have to say. He opened his mouth, but Camila interrupted once more. Come on, Nora. You spent every weekend working on drawings while Gabriel wanted someone who actually enjoyed life. You cannot blame him forever because you were married to your career before you ever married him. Her words landed with terrifying precision because they targeted every insecurity I had quietly carried for years. I had worked long hours. I had chased difficult restoration projects. But I had never once believed those choices meant I deserved betrayal. You are my sister, I whispered. Camila shrugged almost casually. That does not mean I have to apologize for falling in love. The room became impossibly still. For a brief moment I considered arguing, defending myself, demanding explanations that could never repair what had already been broken. Instead I reached toward my left hand and slowly removed the engagement ring. I placed it carefully on the kitchen island between them. Then I hope both of you remember this moment, I said softly. Because I will. I turned and walked toward the door. Behind me Gabriel called my name several times, but I never looked back. As the apartment door closed, I realized something had ended that could never be rebuilt. The following weeks became a blur of exhaustion and quiet humiliation. Camila announced her relationship with Gabriel almost immediately. They married less than a year later, presenting their relationship to the family as an unexpected love story rather than an affair that had begun during my engagement. She posted smiling photographs online accompanied by cheerful captions about finding unexpected happiness. Friends congratulated them. Some relatives privately told me that perhaps the relationship had simply not been meant to be. Very few people asked what had actually happened. Even fewer wanted the answer. Then came the family barbecue for my mother's birthday. I almost stayed home, but Mom begged me to come because she believed time might soften everyone's anger. I wanted to believe that too. When I arrived, relatives gathered around the backyard tables pretending everything was normal. Camila greeted guests as though nothing unusual had happened. Gabriel stood comfortably beside her. At one point Camila disappeared into the house. She returned a few minutes later wearing something that instantly made my stomach tighten. It was my old university sweatshirt, the one I had left at my parents' house years earlier. Across the front were the faded words College of Architecture. She looked directly at me before raising her coffee cup with a playful smile. I thought maybe if I dressed like Nora today, everyone would remember she still exists. Several people laughed awkwardly, assuming it was harmless teasing. I looked toward my mother. She was standing near the porch with quiet sadness in her eyes. She said nothing. Neither did I. Later that afternoon she quietly slipped an envelope into my hand while nobody else was watching. Do not open this here, she whispered. Just promise me you will keep moving forward. Before I could ask what she meant, Camila called everyone together for birthday cake, and Mom gently walked away as though nothing unusual had happened. I opened the envelope alone that night. Inside was a short note in my mother's handwriting. Do not let anyone convince you that leaving was the same as abandoning us. Keep building the life they tried to make you ashamed of. I carried that note to Savannah and kept it inside my drafting case for years. Sitting in the chapel 8 years later, I suddenly understood that Mom had not been asking me to forget what happened. She had been quietly giving me permission to survive it. I slipped quietly back into the present as the minister concluded his final remarks and invited everyone to stand for a closing prayer. Around me, the soft rustle of black coats and the creak of wooden pews filled the chapel. I lowered my head with everyone else, but my thoughts had already traveled 8 years into the past, to the life I rebuilt one careful step at a time after walking away from everything I thought would define my future. 2 weeks after the engagement ended, I accepted a position with a historic preservation firm in Savannah. I packed everything I owned into a used crossover vehicle, hugged my mother goodbye in the driveway, and promised her I would call every Sunday. She held my face between her hands before I left and smiled through tears. "Do not let someone else's choices decide who you become," she whispered. Those words stayed with me during every lonely mile across the country. Savannah was nothing like Madison. I knew almost no one. My apartment was barely large enough for a drafting table, a twin bed, and a tiny kitchen where I learned how to stretch every grocery dollar. During the day I worked restoring century-old buildings. At night I attended graduate classes in architectural conservation. Weekends disappeared into research, construction sites, and freelance drafting jobs that helped pay tuition. Life became exhausting, but it was an honest kind of exhaustion. Every achievement belonged entirely to me. During those years I quietly transferred money home every month. My mother never asked for help, but medical appointments became more frequent after her diagnosis, and insurance rarely covered everything. I never told anyone in the family how much I sent because I did not want gratitude. I simply wanted my mother to worry about her health instead of unpaid bills. Whenever she thanked me over the phone, I always answered the same way. "You took care of me my whole life. Let me do this." She would laugh softly before changing the subject because she hated feeling like a burden. Camila, meanwhile, filled social media with photographs from luxury resorts, rooftop restaurants, designer boutiques, and smiling anniversary celebrations with Gabriel. Relatives often shared her posts with comments about how proud they were of everything she had accomplished. Sometimes distant cousins even forwarded those pictures to me, believing they were helping reconnect the family. I never corrected them. I simply wished them well and returned to work. One rainy Tuesday nearly 4 years after I moved to Savannah, my supervisor asked me to present a restoration proposal to a legal team representing a historic library foundation. I almost declined because public speaking had never been my strength, but she insisted. "Nobody knows this project better than you," she said. "Let your work speak." I spent days preparing every drawing and every cost estimate until I knew the presentation almost by heart. When I finished speaking that afternoon, the room remained unusually quiet for several seconds. I worried I had overlooked something important. Then one of the attorneys smiled and began asking thoughtful questions, not about budgets, but about why preserving old buildings mattered so much to me. That attorney was Levi Howard. Unlike many people I had met through business, Levi never seemed impressed by titles or appearances. He listened far more than he talked. After the meeting ended, he approached me carrying a folder full of notes. "Would you mind explaining one thing?" he asked. I expected another technical question about construction permits. Instead he pointed toward one of my sketches. "You wrote that buildings remember people long after people forget themselves." I have never heard architecture described that way. I felt embarrassed. "That was just a personal note." "It was a beautiful one," he replied. "I hope you never stop writing them." That conversation lasted only 15 minutes, yet somehow it lingered in my thoughts for weeks. Levi never flirted. He never tried to impress me. He simply treated my ideas as though they mattered. Months later we happened to cross paths again at another preservation conference. Then again at a fundraising event for a community museum. Eventually coffee became lunch, lunch became weekend walks through historic neighborhoods, and before I realized it, I found myself laughing without wondering whether I was being judged. The first time I told Levi about Camila and Gabriel, I expected sympathy. Instead he quietly asked, "Have you forgiven yourself for trusting the wrong people?" His question surprised me because I had spent years blaming only them. That evening I realized I had also been carrying guilt for believing I should have noticed the warning signs sooner. Levi gently reminded me that trust was never a weakness. Misusing someone else's trust was. That single conversation changed something inside me. From that point forward, I stopped measuring my worth against the people who had hurt me. Life gradually became lighter. My career grew. Levi's legal practice expanded. We celebrated promotions, small victories, and ordinary Tuesdays with equal gratitude because neither of us ever forgot how quickly life could change. We married quietly 3 years later in a small ceremony at a restored public garden, with my mother attending through a private video call because her health no longer allowed her to travel. Meanwhile, my calls with Mom remained constant. She never complained about Camila, never criticized Gabriel, and never revealed family conflicts. If I asked whether everything was all right, she always answered, "Everything that truly matters is all right." Looking back, I now wondered how much she had been protecting me from. A soft cough near the front of the chapel pulled my attention back once again. The minister thanked everyone for attending before inviting the family to remain seated for a brief private reading after the guests departed. Camila immediately straightened in her seat with quiet confidence, as though she already knew exactly how the afternoon would unfold. She leaned toward Gabriel and whispered something that made him smile. Then, as mourners slowly began filing toward the exit, I noticed Levi still sitting calmly with the leather portfolio resting across his lap. He was not preparing to leave. Instead, he quietly reached inside the portfolio and removed a thick sealed packet bearing my mother's unmistakable handwriting across the front. Beneath Levi's name, she had written a single instruction: deliver unopened to Harold Fisher after my funeral. When I read those words, my heartbeat stopped. My mother had entrusted something to my husband nearly a year earlier, and he had carried her secret into the chapel without ever revealing it to me. I could not take my eyes off the envelope in Levi's hands. My mother's handwriting was unmistakable, careful, and elegant, the same script she used every year when she mailed birthday cards even after texting became easier. Camila noticed it a second later. Her confident smile returned almost immediately. She leaned toward Gabriel and whispered something that made him nod with quiet satisfaction. I already knew what they were thinking. Lawyers handled paperwork after every funeral. There was nothing unusual about sealed envelopes. Whatever my mother had arranged, Camila clearly believed it would confirm everything she had spent years telling the family. The last of the guests slowly filtered out of the chapel until only close relatives remained seated. The minister stepped aside while an older gentleman wearing a dark navy suit approached the front. I recognized him after a moment. His name was Harold Fisher. He had been my mother's estate attorney for years. Harold adjusted his glasses and thanked everyone for remaining after the service. Patricia Green left several instructions that she requested be carried out today, he said calmly. Camila immediately stood and walked toward him with effortless confidence. Before we begin, she said warmly, I just want everyone to know that our mother loved this family more than anything. I know these last few years were difficult, but I tried my best to be there for her every single day. Several relatives nodded sympathetically. One aunt even reached over to squeeze Camila's hand. You sacrificed so much, she whispered. Camila lowered her eyes with practiced humility. It was never a sacrifice. She was my mother. I watched silently from my seat. Every sentence sounded convincing because there was enough truth mixed into it. Camila had visited Mom. She had attended appointments. She had posted cheerful photographs from holidays. What nobody in that room knew was that many of the medical bills had quietly arrived at my apartment mailbox after Mom added my address as the payment contact. Every month I paid them electronically without mentioning it to anyone. Mom had begged me not to tell the family. Peace is worth more than recognition, she always said. I believed her because she never asked for anything that benefited herself. Harold opened a folder and glanced toward Levi. Mr. Howard, thank you for coming. Levi stood and walked forward with the same quiet confidence that first caught my attention years ago during that preservation meeting in Savannah. He placed Patricia's sealed packet in Harold's hands. Harold broke the outer seal and removed a written authorization, an inventory of supporting materials, and 3 individually sealed folders. The authorization confirmed that Harold remained the sole attorney responsible for the estate, while Levi had served only as the independent custodian of Patricia's personal records. Camila looked mildly surprised. "You know each other?" she asked Harold. Harold smiled politely. "Yes. Mr. Howard has been assisting with a confidential matter requested personally by your mother." Camila laughed softly. "Well, that explains why he came dressed like a lawyer." Several relatives smiled politely. Levi did not react. He simply placed the sealed envelope on the table beside Harold before stepping back. Camila looked him over for the first time with genuine curiosity. "Nora," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "you never mentioned your husband works with estate planning. That must be comfortable." Her pause carried just enough condescension to suggest she found his profession ordinary. "Not nearly as exciting as real estate development, I suppose." Gabriel smiled proudly beside her. Levi answered before I could speak. "I enjoy helping families honor the wishes of people who trusted them." His tone remained perfectly respectful. Camila tilted her head. "That sounds admirable." Then she added with another polished smile, "Although I imagine today will be fairly straightforward. Mom and I discussed practical matters many times." Harold quietly cleared his throat. "Mrs. Green actually instructed me not to discuss certain matters with any family member before today." Camila blinked once, her smile tightening almost imperceptibly. "Really?" "Yes." Harold removed another document from the folder. "She was very specific." A noticeable silence settled across the chapel. Even Gabriel shifted uneasily in his chair. Camila recovered first. "Well," she said with a small laugh, "I suppose Mother enjoyed surprising people." Harold nodded without commenting. He instead turned toward the family. "Before any legal documents are read, Mrs. Green asked that I share one personal statement." He unfolded a single sheet of paper. "She wrote this approximately 11 months ago." Every eye focused on him. "To my family," Harold began reading, "if you are hearing these words, then I hope you remember that kindness shown in private reveals more about a person than kindness displayed in public. I have watched each of you make choices. Some brought me comfort. Others brought me sorrow. I have remained silent longer than many people would understand, not because I failed to notice the truth, but because I hoped the truth might one day reveal itself without my help." The room became completely still. My heartbeat quickened. Camila no longer looked entirely comfortable. She crossed one arm over the other, a habit she always had whenever she felt uncertain. Harold continued reading. "There are people in this room who know only part of our family's story. There are also people who believe they know all of it. Those are not always the same thing." I glanced toward Levi. His expression never changed, but I noticed his hand resting lightly on the leather portfolio beside him as though he already knew exactly what came next. Camila interrupted with a nervous smile. "Mom always loved speaking in riddles." Harold slowly lowered the page. "The remainder of her instructions requires several supporting documents." He looked directly toward Levi. "Mr. Howard?" Levi stepped forward once more, unlocked the leather portfolio, and carefully removed 3 thick sealed file folders marked with dates spanning nearly 8 years. When he placed them on the table, I immediately recognized my mother's handwriting again, but this time another detail caught my attention. Across the front of each folder she had written the same sentence in bold blue ink, "Open only when everyone is finally together." Levi rested one hand lightly on the stack of sealed folders before looking toward Harold, who gave a small nod that seemed to confirm everything had already been discussed long before today. Nobody spoke. Even the sound of rain tapping softly against the chapel windows seemed to disappear beneath the weight of expectation filling the room. Camila forced another smile, although it no longer carried the effortless confidence she had displayed throughout the service. "I am sure Mother simply wanted everything organized," she said. "She always appreciated details." Harold answered politely. "She certainly did." He broke the seal on the first folder with deliberate care before removing several documents protected inside transparent sleeves. Mrs. Green instructed me to begin with financial records covering the past 8 years. Camila looked mildly puzzled. Financial records? Yes. Harold adjusted his glasses. She believed context mattered before conclusions. Gabriel shifted in his chair. Is all of this really necessary? Levi finally spoke. Patricia believed it was. There was nothing confrontational in his voice. If anything, his calmness made the atmosphere even heavier. Harold placed the first document beneath a small display stand so everyone seated nearby could see it. These are payment confirmations from Coastal Georgia Cancer Center. He looked around the room. Over the course of 7 years, nearly every balance not covered by insurance was paid within 48 hours of being issued. My aunt smiled warmly toward Camila. We all knew you took wonderful care of your mother. Camila accepted the compliment with a grateful nod. She deserved everything. Harold remained silent for another moment before gently continuing. According to the hospital's billing department, however, every payment came from the same account. Camila's smile remained fixed. Well, that makes sense. I handled most of her finances. Harold slowly shook his head. No, Mrs. Green never authorized your personal accounts for those transactions. The chapel became noticeably quieter. Harold turned another page and read directly from the statement. The account holder was Nora Green. My aunt blinked in confusion before looking toward me. Another relative frowned as though trying to remember whether he had misunderstood. Camila laughed softly. There must be some mistake. Harold calmly slid another document onto the table. There were more than 80 separate electronic payments and transfers recorded over those 7 years. Each one originated from the same Savannah account ending in 4872. My heartbeat quickened. I had never intended for anyone to know. My mother had insisted that nobody be told because she wanted help to remain an act of love rather than a competition for gratitude. Camila folded her arms. Nora probably helped once or twice. Harold quietly replied, she covered nearly every remaining balance from the month of your mother's diagnosis until 3 weeks before her passing. Gabriel looked toward Camila, surprised enough that he forgot to hide it. She answered before anyone else could speak. Mother never mentioned that. Levi met her eyes for the first time. She was honoring a promise she asked Nora to keep. Nobody moved. Harold continued opening the file. There is more. He placed invoices for roof repairs, property taxes, furnace maintenance, and insurance renewals side by side. These expenses were also paid. From Nora's account. My cousin leaned forward. I thought Camila handled the house. Harold answered carefully. Mrs. Green appreciated Camila's visits and companionship. She also recorded that Camila drove her to many appointments and stayed with her during several difficult treatments. Patricia never denied that care, she objected only to the belief that Camila had carried every burden alone. The financial responsibilities were largely managed elsewhere. Camila's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. Mom wanted me there because I actually spent time with her. I finally spoke after remaining silent throughout the reading. You did spend time with her. Camila looked surprised that I had not challenged her. Then why is everyone acting like I lied, she demanded. Because nobody is accusing you, I answered quietly. The documents are simply telling the story Mom wanted everyone to hear. My words lingered in the silence between us. For a brief second Camila seemed uncertain whether to become angry or defensive. Harold reached into the folder once more. Mrs. Green also left handwritten notes explaining why she requested these records. He unfolded a single sheet. She wrote, Nora wanted no recognition. Every time I thanked her for helping, she reminded me that love does not send invoices. She asked me never to compare my daughters. I honored her request while I was alive. After I am gone, I only ask that people know the truth. Several relatives lowered their eyes. My aunt quietly wiped away tears. One of my uncles looked toward me with an expression I had not seen in years. It was not pity. It was regret. Camila noticed those changing faces immediately. She stepped closer to Harold. "Surely that is everything," she said with forced composure. "People misunderstand families all the time." Harold slowly closed the first folder. "Actually, Mrs. Green specifically instructed us that the first folder should establish only one fact." Camila swallowed. "Which fact?" Levi answered before Harold could speak. "That appearances and reality were often very different." He gently rested his hand on the second sealed folder. Unlike the first, this one carried a red label across the front. Harold read it aloud exactly as Patricia had written it. "Please open this only after everyone understands who quietly carried my burdens." Levi carefully broke the seal, removed a slim flash drive sealed inside an evidence envelope, and placed it on the table. Harold looked toward the family before speaking in an unusually measured voice. The drive contained selected clips from the home security system Patricia installed in the common areas after her first serious fall. The cameras were visible, family members knew they were operating, and Patricia personally preserved the clips she believed were important. She instructed us that this recording should never be shown while she was alive, but she believed it would answer questions that documents alone never could. At Patricia's request, Harold had arranged a small laptop and portable display beside the front table before the service. He inserted the flash drive, entered the access code Patricia had provided, and the first preserved security clip appeared on the screen. The first recording showed nothing dramatic at all. It was simply my mother's living room on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. She sat in her favorite chair with a blanket across her lap, reading a novel while soft music played in the background. A timestamp in the corner showed the date from nearly 5 years earlier. Then the front door opened. Camila walked in carrying shopping bags from an upscale department store. "Hi, Mom," she called cheerfully before placing the bags on the dining table. My mother smiled warmly. "How was your afternoon?" Camila shrugged. "Busy. Gabriel wanted to stop by another dealership." She noticed several unopened medical bills resting on the coffee table. "You still have not taken care of these?" My mother answered quietly. "Nora already told me she would transfer the money tomorrow." Camila rolled her eyes. She really needs to stop trying to play the hero. She gathered the envelopes and slipped them into a kitchen drawer without opening them. "The family already thinks I am doing everything anyway." She laughed softly as though she had made an innocent joke. The recording ended. Nobody spoke. Camila folded her arms. "That proves absolutely nothing," she said quickly. "Everyone jokes around at home." Harold nodded. Mrs. Green expected that reaction. Levi opened another video. This one showed my mother sitting at the dining room table while speaking with someone just outside the camera's view. A moment later Camila entered carrying several framed family photographs. She began rearranging them on a shelf. She removed one photograph of Mom and me standing together after my architecture school graduation and quietly placed it inside a cabinet instead. In its place she displayed a newer photograph of herself and Gabriel smiling during a beach vacation. My mother noticed immediately. "Why did you move Nora's picture?" she asked gently. Camila answered without hesitation. "People visit you all the time now. It is easier if they remember who is actually here." My mother looked toward the cabinet for several long seconds before saying nothing more. The room inside the chapel became painfully quiet. I remembered that photograph. Months after that visit, Mom had asked me to send another copy because she could not find the original. I had assumed it was accidentally misplaced. Camila shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "This is ridiculous," she muttered. "She is making me sound terrible because she only recorded random moments." Levi calmly replied, "There are many moments." Harold opened a written inventory prepared by my mother. It listed several occasions when Camila had moved photographs, furniture, and family keepsakes without first asking where Patricia wanted them kept. Some items had eventually been returned, while others were later identified among belongings Patricia had knowingly given Camila. Patricia did not describe the issue as theft. She documented it because she believed the pattern showed how often decisions were being made around her instead of with her. Camila looked offended. "Are you accusing me of stealing from my own mother?" Levi answered carefully. "No one is accusing anyone today. We are reading what Patricia personally documented." Gabriel finally spoke after remaining unusually quiet throughout the afternoon. "This is becoming unfair," he said. Patricia was sick. Illness affects memory. Harold calmly reached for another document. Mrs. Green anticipated that concern as well. He placed 2 medical evaluations on the table. Both physicians independently documented that she remained mentally competent when these notes and recordings were created. Gabriel leaned back without another word. I watched Camila carefully. For the first time since I arrived at the funeral, genuine uncertainty crossed her face. She no longer looked like someone controlling the room. She looked like someone desperately trying to predict what might happen next. Harold continued reading from my mother's notes. Camila often believed I noticed less than I truly did. I remained silent because confrontation would only push my daughters farther apart. Silence is not blindness. Those final 4 words settled over everyone like a heavy blanket. My uncle quietly removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. One cousin looked toward me with visible embarrassment. "Nora," she whispered, "I had no idea." I offered only a small nod. There was nothing left to explain. The evidence spoke far more clearly than I ever could. Camila suddenly stood. "Enough," she said firmly. "You are turning my mother's funeral into a public trial." Levi looked directly at her. "Actually, your mother specifically instructed us to wait until after the service because she wanted everyone together one final time." Camila stared at him. "How long have you known about all of this?" "Almost a year." "And you never told Nora?" Levi glanced toward me before answering. "Patricia asked me to safeguard the sealed records without reviewing their contents or telling Nora they existed. Harold remained responsible for every legal decision. I knew only when the packet had to be delivered, not what Patricia intended to reveal." I felt tears gathering despite everything. Even now, my mother had tried to protect both of us in the only way she knew how. Camila slowly sat back down, but the confidence that once defined every movement had completely disappeared. Harold carefully closed the second folder. "There remains one final file," he said quietly. "Mrs. Green instructed that it should only be opened after everyone understood the difference between appearances and truth." Levi reached for the last sealed folder. Unlike the previous 2, this one contained no financial documents and no recordings. Instead, he removed a single cream-colored envelope sealed with blue wax. Across the front, written in my mother's unmistakable handwriting, were words that immediately caused Camila's face to lose every trace of color, to be opened only after Camila has heard everything else. Harold accepted the cream-colored envelope with both hands as though he understood its importance long before anyone else in the room did. The blue wax seal carried my mother's initials, still perfectly intact. Nobody spoke while he carefully broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside. Unlike the financial records and legal documents, this page contained only my mother's handwriting from top to bottom. Harold looked toward Camila before beginning. "My dear Camila," he read softly, "if these words are being spoken aloud, then it means I have finally left a conversation unfinished. I chose this because I wanted you to hear my voice one last time without either of us interrupting the other." Camila lowered her eyes but said nothing. Harold continued. "You have always believed I could not see beyond the version of our family you presented to the world. I saw far more than you realized. I noticed when photographs disappeared. I noticed when conversations changed as soon as I entered a room. I noticed when people praised sacrifices that belonged to someone else. I remained silent because I hoped maturity would teach you what confrontation never could." Several relatives quietly exchanged uneasy glances. Harold paused only long enough to turn the page. There were many evenings when Nora called after finishing another long workday. She never asked how people spoke about her. She only asked whether I had enough groceries, whether the furnace was working, whether I needed another ride to the hospital. Every conversation ended the same way. She asked me not to tell anyone she was helping because she did not want kindness to become another competition inside this family. Tears blurred my vision before I even realized they had begun. Levi quietly reached over and rested his hand against mine beneath the pew. He never looked at me. He simply reminded me that I was not standing alone anymore. Harold continued reading. Camila, I never loved your sister more than I loved you. I loved both of my daughters with everything I had. But love does not require me to ignore the truth. There is a difference between making mistakes and building a life upon appearances. I pray you discover that difference while there is still time. Camila inhaled sharply. She never said those things to me, she whispered. Harold answered gently without lowering the letter. She wrote them herself. The room remained silent as he resumed. Many people will expect me to reward loyalty with money. That is not the lesson I wish to leave behind. Money disappears. Character remains after everything else has been spent. Camila slowly lifted her head. For the first time all afternoon, fear had replaced frustration. She looked toward Harold as though trying to predict what came next. Harold carefully removed another folded page from inside the envelope. Attached to my letter is my final instruction concerning my estate. Every eye followed the movement of the paper. After careful consideration, he read, I leave my lakeside cottage to Nora Green. She always found peace there, even as a little girl, and I hope she will continue creating beauty in a place that brought our family its happiest memories. My breath caught unexpectedly. That little cottage had never been valuable compared to the rest of my mother's assets, but it had been our favorite place throughout my childhood. Camila immediately looked relieved. She leaned back with a faint smile that almost suggested victory. I understood why. She believed the remaining estate would naturally pass to her. Harold continued reading before anyone could speak. After the payment of my lawful debts, taxes, medical obligations, and final expenses, the remainder of my estate, including my investment accounts, savings, and the net proceeds from the sale of my primary residence, shall fund the Patricia Green Foundation for Historic Preservation Scholarships. The foundation will provide educational grants to students pursuing architectural conservation and community restoration. Confused whispers spread across the chapel. My uncle blinked in surprise. She donated almost everything? Harold nodded. That was her decision. Camila stared in disbelief. What? She asked quietly. That cannot be right. Harold handed her the signed document. The will and accompanying foundation documents were properly signed and witnessed while your mother was mentally competent. The estate will now be administered according to those instructions. Camila scanned the page with trembling hands. She gave it away? Harold answered calmly. She believed education would outlive inheritance. Camila looked toward me as though expecting me to argue or celebrate. I did neither. My mother had once told me that old buildings mattered because they reminded people that they were only temporary caretakers of something much larger than themselves. Suddenly her final decision made perfect sense. She had not wanted either daughter measured by the size of an inheritance. She wanted both of us measured by the lives we chose to build. Camila lowered the papers onto the table. So Nora gets the cottage, she said quietly, and strangers receive everything else. Harold gently corrected her. Future students receive opportunities your mother hoped would improve communities for generations. Levi quietly added, Patricia once told me that Nora never needed wealth to become successful. She only wanted people to know the truth. Hearing those words spoken aloud finally broke something inside me. Not because of the cottage. Not because of the foundation. But because after 8 years of silence, someone besides me finally understood who my mother truly was. Camila remained completely still. Gabriel reached toward her shoulder, but she quietly pulled away. Nobody looked angry anymore. Nobody looked victorious. The room felt strangely peaceful, as though years of misunderstanding had finally begun settling into place. Harold gathered the documents into neat stacks before looking toward Levi one last time. Levi nodded and reached into the now nearly empty leather portfolio. "There is only one item remaining," he said softly. "Patricia instructed me to deliver it only after every document had been read." He carefully removed a small wrapped package tied with faded blue ribbon. My heart skipped the moment I recognized the paper. It had tiny hand-drawn pine trees across it, exactly like the wrapping paper my mother always saved for Christmas gifts at the lakeside cottage. Levi turned toward me and quietly placed the package in my hands. "She asked that you open this after everyone heard the truth," he said. "She believed what is inside would explain everything she never found the courage to say while she was alive." I looked down at the small package resting in my hands and carefully untied the faded blue ribbon. The paper unfolded with almost no sound, revealing a weathered leather journal that I recognized immediately. It was the same journal my mother carried every summer when we visited the lakeside cottage. As children, Camila and I used to tease her because she wrote something every evening before bed, no matter how tired she was. I had always assumed those pages held grocery lists, garden plans, or reminders for the following day. I gently opened the cover and found a handwritten note tucked inside. It simply read, "Read the final pages first." My fingers trembled as I turned to the back of the journal. The final entry had been written only 6 days before my mother passed away. "Nora, if you are reading this, then my greatest wish has finally come true. You know the truth, and more importantly, everyone else knows it too. I never wanted you to spend your life proving your goodness to people who had already decided not to see it. I asked you to stay silent because I hoped silence would protect what little peace remained in our family. Looking back, perhaps I asked too much of you. For that, I am sorry." I paused as tears quietly slipped down my cheeks. Levi gently squeezed my hand but never interrupted. Harold and the rest of my family remained completely silent. I continued reading aloud. "Camila was not born selfish. She slowly became afraid that being admired mattered more than being honest. I prayed every day that she would discover the difference before life taught her in a harsher way than I ever could. If she has finally heard these words today, then perhaps there is still hope for both of my daughters. Nora, do not let bitterness become the inheritance you carry away from this room. Leave with peace instead." I slowly closed the journal, unable to speak for several moments. Across the room, Camila remained frozen in her chair. Her eyes were fixed on the floor. For the first time in years, there was no carefully prepared response waiting behind her expression. For several long minutes, Camila said nothing. Her eyes moved from the journal to the relatives who had once praised her, then to the empty seat where Gabriel had been sitting. The loss of the inheritance had shocked her, but the journal had taken away something she had depended on far more, the belief that our mother had never seen through her. When she finally rose, she no longer looked defeated by money. She looked confronted by herself. She quietly stood and walked toward me until only a few feet separated us. Nobody moved. Nobody tried to stop her. Her voice was almost unrecognizable when she finally spoke. "I spent so many years trying to convince everyone that I was the daughter Mom depended on." She swallowed hard before continuing. "Somewhere along the way, I started believing my own version of the story." She looked directly at me. "I cannot undo what I did. I cannot give you back the years you lost because of me. But I am sorry." The apology did not erase the past. It did not rebuild birthdays, holidays, or countless conversations that never happened. Yet hearing those words felt strangely lighter than carrying another decade of silence. I thought about everything my mother had written only moments earlier. Then I answered as honestly as I could. Forgiveness does not happen because someone deserves it. Sometimes it happens because carrying anger becomes too heavy. Camila nodded slowly, tears finally falling without being hidden behind carefully placed tissues. Gabriel quietly stood from his chair. He looked at Camila, then at me. Before lowering his eyes. "There is nothing I can say that changes any of this," he admitted. Without another word, he quietly left the chapel. Camila watched him go but did not call his name. For the first time, she seemed to understand that the relationship she once treated as proof of victory had never repaired what it cost her to obtain. Several relatives gradually approached me one by one. My aunt embraced me with tears in her eyes. "I should have asked more questions instead of believing the easiest story," she whispered. My uncle apologized for the distance that had grown between us. Even cousins I had not spoken with in years quietly thanked me for caring for my mother without asking for recognition. Their words could not replace the lost years, but they reminded me that truth sometimes arrives slowly and still manages to heal what seemed impossible. A few weeks later, Levi and I drove to the lakeside cottage. The old porch still creaked beneath our feet exactly as it had throughout my childhood. Inside, I found shelves filled with family photographs my mother had carefully preserved, including the graduation picture Camila had hidden years earlier. It rested in a simple wooden frame beside one final note. Every family deserves at least one place where memories are allowed to remain honest. Rather than selling the cottage, Levi and I restored it together over the following months. We converted the downstairs into a small retreat where architecture students receiving scholarships from the Patricia Green Foundation could spend weekends studying, sketching, and learning about historic preservation. On the wall near the entrance, we placed a modest plaque that simply read, "Built with patience. Shared with hope." Camila wrote to me several months later. Her letter was short. She told me she had begun volunteering with a neighborhood literacy program because, for the first time in many years, she wanted to do something that nobody would ever applaud online. I did not know where that path would lead her, and I did not expect instant transformation. Some journeys take longer than others. I wrote back wishing her well, and for the first time since we were children, our conversation contained no competition, no performance, and no need to prove anything. As Levi and I stood together on the cottage porch one quiet evening watching the sun disappear behind the lake, I realized my mother had been right. She had not left behind an inheritance measured in dollars. She had left behind an opportunity for truth to become the foundation upon which the rest of our lives could finally be rebuilt. Perhaps stories like this quietly remind us that recognition does not always arrive when we hope it will. There are seasons when kindness goes unnoticed, sacrifices remain invisible, and misunderstandings seem to last far longer than they should. Yet there is something deeply comforting about believing that character is not measured by how loudly it is celebrated, but by how faithfully it is lived when nobody is watching. Sometimes peace begins not when the past changes, but when our hearts no longer ask the past to become something it never could. And perhaps forgiveness is less about forgetting painful moments than allowing ourselves to keep walking without letting those moments decide who we become. If you found yourself in Nora's place, how do you think you would have responded after hearing Camila's apology? What part of this family's journey stayed with you the most, and what would you have chosen to do differently if you had been standing in that chapel?